Oil and energy resources were once Putin's greatest strength for Russia. However, this has now turned into a great tragedy for the Russian people. Millions of Russians get up at 5 a.m. to queue for gasoline.
Очередное дно пробито.
The people are angry because those who can get 10 liters of gasoline from morning to night are the lucky ones. Agricultural activities are being restricted. Daily life is paralyzed by gas lines. People are venting their anger in Primoria, Crimea, Nizhny Novgorod, Rostov, Ryazan, Saratov, the Kuril region of Sakhalin, and many other areas. Because winter is coming, people need fuel and gas both to heat their homes and to produce. Now, from the Russian Far East to Crimea, from northern Russia to the far south, every region is in the midst of a catastrophic crisis. The lines of cars gathering in front of gas stations across the country, including Moscow, are no longer a common sight. The wait that begins at dawn on the outskirts of the city turns into a line of frustration that spreads to the central districts by noon. There are no sirens, but engines are not running. In Primoria, gas station forecourts fill up before dawn. 10-liter limits are written on paper, and drivers wait in line. In Crimea, coupon sales have returned, and some pumps are linked to time slots. On the Kuril line, a 92 has been temporarily removed from the list. Social media shows miles-long queues, vehicles waiting overnight, hoods opened in anger. The question, even Moscow, is quickly circulating. The capital seems somewhat isolated for now, but as refinery chimneys fall silent one by one, prices rise and nerves fray. 3 different methods are being applied in 3 different cities on the same day, and none of them are providing any real relief. The beginning of this wave was not a single spark. Attacks that came one after another at the end of the summer, units that were closed for a long time, and fragile distribution plans all came into play at the same time. While one station hangs a "fuel out" sign, another announces "low octane only." The only thing that makes the difference between cities is how lucky the pipeline feeding the depot is that day. Looking at who was affected nationwide, the picture is even starker. The total population of regions where shortages or long lines were publicly confirmed has long surpassed tens of millions. When vehicle ownership rates are factored in, the number of drivers directly experiencing disruption is in the millions. This includes commuters, small business owners, delivery drivers, rural transport operators, and taxi drivers. The indirect impact is even broader. 2 hours lost in one place due to factors such as delays in urban deliveries, couriers being able to make fewer rounds, disruptions in getting goods to supermarket shelves, delays in concrete pouring times at construction sites, and the end-of-day meter running out in the port warehouse store triangle is reflected in price tags in another place and in shift schedules in yet another. On the other hand, the crisis is not just an economic issue, but also a social and psychological test. In the minds of a generation that grew up with the phrase "energy superpower," the image of empty pumps becomes a kind of disappointment. Over a 10-year period, Putin distributed Russian gas and oil to nearly 2/3 of the world. This paved the way for an increase in the Russian people's standard of living and allowed them to live in abundance within the country compared to the Soviet era. However, Ukraine's attacks on refineries have caused Russia to be unable to meet its own fuel supply. Emergency meetings were held at the Kremlin, but the fuel crisis could not be resolved. On the morning of July 28, 2025, Russia banned fuel producers from exporting gasoline.
The Russian government announced Wednesday that the temporary ban on gasoline exports, first imposed in late July, will now run until October 31.
It wanted to bring peace to the domestic market. However, the expected did not happen. State intervention followed the supply shock one after another. The government reimposed a ban on gasoline exports. The total ban was extended until September 30th, while derivative and spot restrictions were extended until October 31st. The rationale was to redirect domestic supply to areas experiencing regional shortages and to curb the surge in wholesale prices. This is a formula that makes sense on paper, but it has 2 side effects in the field. The first is the division of the market into regional fuel islands. The second is that, due to hoarding and transportation premiums, prices remain sticky rather than falling. The lengthening of queues in the Far East and Crimea, and some stations switching to quotas or time limits, are precisely the result of this stickiness. And now we have reached the point where Russia, one of the world's richest countries in terms of oil, has begun to experience a colossal oil crisis within its own borders. It is reported that in the first 19 days of August, gasoline production fell by 8.6% and diesel production by 10.3% across the country. As the production graph declines, it is unreasonable to expect the capital's price graph to remain flat on its own. Today, the queues are around the periphery, and the pressure is seeping into the capital via price tags. The next question is, if the decline in production continues, will the queues come to Moscow, or will Moscow be punished with prices instead of queues? The first option produces political noise. The second option produces social grumbling. Both are costly. We must quantify this crisis. The total population of regions experiencing shortages, rationing, or long queues is conservatively estimated at tens of millions. When you consider Primorye in the Far East, occupied Crimea, the Kuril line, and the Rostov-Nizhny Novgorod-Ryazan-Saratov axis, where shortages are reported intermittently, it is no exaggeration to say that the directly affected population exceeds at least 15 million people. Car ownership in Russia stands at 331 per thousand people as of early 2025. Applying this ratio to the aforementioned population, the number of directly affected drivers behind the wheel would be roughly 5 to 6 million. So the issue is not just the 3 to 5 kilometer line in front of the station, but the nervous system of domestic mobility. We emphasize that this estimate is based on a conservative methodology. Total population plus list of confirmed major regions plus official motor vehicle ownership rate. Conservative in forecast, striking in meaning. So how did this crisis grow so quickly? The answer lies in the dynamic interplay between the front lines and the home front. Since late 2024, Ukraine's deep strike capabilities have improved. In 2025, Russia's refinery and terminal network became more frequent targets. The latest wave hit the Primorsk terminal at the Baltic exit and the Kirishi refinery. Primorsk alone is key to Russian crude and product exports. When hit, the shipping window narrows and tanker schedules are disrupted. And Ukraine's attacks on more than 50 Russian refineries since early July have had a cumulative effect. The fire on the ground was enough to explain the volatility on the stock market. In Russia, the phrase "no fuel" may sound like a technical warning, but it directly causes concern in city life. This concern triggers early refueling behavior, creating unnecessary congestion in front of stations, thus inflating hourly consumption and resulting in even longer queues. The administration is resorting to tools such as stopping exports and redirecting to the domestic market to break this cycle. However, as long as there is no permanent recovery on the production side, these tools only buy time. Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support. Now let's get back to our main. The fuel shortage also directly affects healthcare services. The priority defined for ambulance fleets is clear on paper. In practice, however, when fuel supply windows narrow, the share allocated to ambulances needs to be managed on a station-by-station basis. While this management is more institutionalized in large cities, in small districts, the nature of the answers to the question, which station, during, which hours can have vital consequences. Family medicine, home health services, and weekly medicine deliveries to rural areas are also feeling the same pressure. A similar story applies to fire and police fleets. On routes requiring constant patrols, fuel planning is normally an invisible task. In times of crisis, it becomes the thickest file on the administrative desk. The agricultural sector is one of the areas that most clearly reveals the true face of fuel. During harvest season, diesel means combine harvesters. If the combine harvester misses its appointment, it's not just one day that's lost, but the entire season. Fuel pressure combined with drought in the southern grain regions delayed farmers' departure times to the fields in some places. Delays in cold chain products meant not only product loss, but also an indirect price increase. This price is reflected in the city dweller's shopping cart, albeit with a delay, but inevitably. Every fluctuation in food prices in city life makes the silent impact of fuel more visible. As the crisis spread, the centre's priority was naturally to keep the capital calm. Large facilities around Moscow, rail connections, and intermediate storage areas kept the city's shelves stocked longer than in other regions. But this is not an immutable reality. As the production gap widens, even the priority to the center principle becomes merely nominal. In other words, products will remain on the shelves for a while longer, but prices will be suffocating. The jump in wholesale prices is already being reflected in retail prices, albeit with a delay but persistently. Therefore, the capital's relatively calm picture for now is not enough to prevent the tension in the surrounding provinces from seeping in through neighboring doors. It is not surprising that the black market reflex emerges in times of crisis. Unauthorized drum sales, fuel transported inappropriately to the field, risky storage methods. All of these bring with them safety issues such as fire and poisoning. When prices are kept in the official channel, the difference in the unofficial channels grows, increasing the risk of counterfeit products. Poor quality fuel can lead to engine failure and accidents, placing an additional burden on the shoulders of institutions that have to manage the crisis. Increased inspections are inevitable. However, there is a fine line between tightening inspections and increasing panic. Maintaining this line depends on clear communication and fair enforcement. The crisis is not just a matter for today, but also for tomorrow. As winter approaches, heating, electricity generation, and industrial fuel will become more prominent issues. The possibility of disruptions in gasoline and diesel spreading to the gas infrastructure could trigger a new wave of debate. Concerns about the natural gas network are also being discussed at this point. Although today's agenda is mostly focused on gasoline and diesel, failures at the border nodes of the gas transmission network have reminded us that pipelines are also vulnerable to attack and sabotage. The fuel crisis could be linked to a broader energy debate as the heating season approaches. Preparing for this requires not only technical maintenance and spare parts supply, but also updating consumption management and regional prioritization plans. If the crisis persists, second-wave effects begin. Vehicle maintenance schedules are disrupted. As drivers turn to cheaper and lower-quality products, failure rates increase. The shift towards public transportation in cities intensifies. Complaints about train crowding rise. Taxi fares follow the cost. Finding a vehicle at night becomes difficult. Substitute solutions are sought in public services. Some local authorities temporarily expand their own internal storage and distribution arrangements for municipal fleets. Such steps alleviate symptoms during the crisis, but are not a substitute for the actual cure. Public expectation is, naturally, for a quick return to... This whole picture also casts a shadow over the country's political climate. Every disruption felt in people's daily lives tests the government's claim that we are in control. When a message of confidence delivered loudly is accompanied by the image of empty pumps, it is only natural that one will swallow the other. Therefore, transparency and accountability are as valuable as technical repairs. It must be clearly explained why a facility is offline, what stage the repairs are at, and when safe production will resume. Uncertainty is the main fuel for rumors. This is not a quick and cheap project, but the most expensive price is repeated outages. The second option is to announce regulations that will protect the domestic market for a certain period with a clearer timetable. The answer to the question, until when and under what conditions, is as important as saying, there is a ban. Thirdly, special train sets and corridors should be planned to serve as a fuel bridge between cities and regions. These sets are kept ready to be deployed in times of crisis. Contingency plans are prepared in advance to compensate for delays that may occur on other lines on the days they are in operation. Let's return to the question, how many people are affected, and clarify it. Using a conservative aggregation method, the total population of regions with mainstream confirmation plus the official motor vehicle ownership rate, it is reasonable to estimate the pool of directly affected drivers at around 5 to 6 million. These are not people waiting in line, but those whose daily mobility depends on fuel access. The indirect impact grows exponentially. Diesel in agriculture, distribution on highways, urban logistics, bus, shuttle routes, small businesses, electric generators. Every 10 minutes in line reverberates for several days on shelves and prices. Today's reality is this. Fuel access is limited in regions where at least tens of millions of people live. 5 to 6 million drivers adjust their daily plans based on the queue. Delays in agriculture and transportation are increasing. Price pressure is mounting in the capital, and price reflexes abroad are triggered by each new attack. This reality is not a regime debate, but an arithmetic debate. And arithmetic transcends politics. If refinery chimneys don't emit smoke, pumps don't work. If pumps don't work, the market doesn't work. Moscow may be relatively calm today, but as long as the supply shock continues, no one will be comfortable tomorrow. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.